Hey everyone, this is Anna Gressel, and you're listening to the AI Drop, your briefing on how AI is reshaping the future of business law and industry. We bring you fresh drops each week so you never miss a beat. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome, everyone. I am really thrilled today to be joined by my partner, Melissa Hodgman, who is a fabulous collaborator on all things securities regulation and AI. And I have the pleasure of working with her on some really interesting cutting edge projects in this area. And Melissa, maybe you could just kick us off and tell us a little bit about your career, what you did at the SEC, and when the SEC actually started getting interested in AI, because I think it'll surprise people, maybe not everyone, but some people to hear it's been a topic of interest for them for a long time.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy my conversations with you, so I'm looking forward to doing this morning. And I get to do some of the most interesting work here at Freshfields because you've joined us. Every time we get a call from you, I know it's going to be something new and interesting. So thank you for being here and thank you for having me. I think you can define AI in various different ways, but it's been well over a decade that the SEC started using AI, in particular to identifying patterns with regard to identifying misconduct in the marketplace, think insider trading, market manipulation. Because what happened is after the dislocation in 2008 and after the Bernie Madoff debacle, the SEC made a very good decision of going out and hiring people from the industry. So we actually had people who could code. We had people who were in back offices who actually were seeing the advent of the use of various forms of data analytics and the beginnings of AI come in and start building different systems for the investigators. In the Division of Enforcement with regard to insider trading, the tools that are there now are absolutely fabulous. And I'm sure we'll get into how insider trading is going these days, but the things that they can catch and the data that they pull in, it can be your parking meter data. It can be when you were on the metro. It could be whose wedding you were at. It's fascinating how effective they can be.
Oh my gosh, I love the idea of all the parking meter data going to the SEC and what might be mined from that. There's so much we could talk about, and I think want to pull on a few different themes because we see enforcement interest covering a lot of topics, and that's sometimes what makes it hard to distill, like, why would the SEC have an interest in AI? Well, there are a lot of different ways that could come up. Some is about AI as a business model and truthfulness about the business model itself. The other is about AI as an actor in the market, whether that's providing information to the market or taking action in the market. So maybe we can cover those in sequence. Melissa, kick us off. Why did we start hearing about AI washing, and what were some of the fact patterns that were giving the SEC pause with respect to disclosures or information provided by companies about AI?
It actually follows a predictable pattern in the financial services whenever there's a new innovation. The SEC doesn't regulate that innovation. It regulates the things around that innovation. Those can be disclosure. Those can be statements that are being made by investment advisors about how they're using AI to pick your stocks and securities for a fund. And I really think the asset management group were the first to step into that space and start to regulate there. But then it can also be how AI is giving somebody an informational advantage. The SEC doesn't like informational advantages for people. That informational advantage can be seen as unfair in terms of insider trading or market manipulation. The next thing was how AI was being used by people in order to trade and to somehow mislead other people in the marketplace with regard to its trades, because it's so fast, because it's so able to do things in sequence and to build a structure that can look like a trading pattern that is suggesting that something is a great investment or an awful investment, when in fact, it's just a machine going back and forth, making its decisions, making its trades, or suggesting to people that they do so. Those are the two places that I really saw it in the first instance, that market manipulation, insider trading, and then that disclosure piece. Typically, people weren't actually there with regard to AI. They weren't actually relying on AI in building the investment theses, in building the funds in the way that they were describing. I think a lot of people get ahead of themselves with regard to this is what I intend to do, as opposed to this is what I'm doing.
And so tell us a little bit about what the SEC did in those contexts and some of the enforcement actions that started coming up in that area.
I think that you would see the market manipulation, you would see the insider trading without even noting that AI was the subject necessarily, but you also had the SEC using AI, as we were talking about, the systems that had been built that were able to find patterns of trading. Algorithmic trading was the first kind of iteration of this. And then the addition of AI on top of that with the learning and the process that it was doing, making people faster with that high frequency trading that we saw, or the pattern of people being on both sides of the markets, trading with themselves in order to build a price or lower a price. You may not have heard of AI in those. The AI washing cases were the more obvious area where the asset management union was coming out and saying, somebody is claiming that they are using AI for this purpose. We went in and looked. It's still an individual making these decisions. You're not getting any benefit of this. If you're looking for that form of trading, their disclosure is materially inaccurate, which is what the SEC cares about. They don't pick winners and losers. They don't go in and say this is a good investment or a bad investment. There were some investments that I investigated that you could never win on, but you weren't allowed at the SEC to investigate those. You investigated whether somebody told everybody you can't win on these.
It's such an interesting time period, and it was really fascinating to see those investigations start coming up. And now we're in an agentic AI era, right? I mean, it's funny, we call these things AI, but then what the technology is sometimes shifts underfoot. Where do you see all of this headed with agentic AI? Like, what are some of the hot topics that you think companies in all industries should be thinking about when they're trying to map SEC interest in the area?
You can delegate decision making to a machine, but you can't delegate liability. I think that that's where we're going to see the SEC. If people are building systems that do things faster, do things more efficiently, effectively, cheaply than having a cadre of individuals doing it, that's absolutely doable. The problem that you're going to have is how you manage the liability within that system, because you're going to continue to own it. And I think a lot of people have a misperception that train AI, you get it going, it's going through its process, you're still holding that liability, that interest from the SEC. You have to do your analysis of your risks and how you're going to manage them and how you're going to keep AI from learning beyond what it's allowed to do, because that's one of the amazing things about it, right? It can start to grow and it might go beyond what it is that a human being typically does, and anticipating what those risks are going to be, or making sure that you know that that's happening before it does. It's just absolutely fascinating and amazing.
So, Melissa, I'd love to give you a few hypotheticals or scenarios to react to, because there's so many different intertwined fact patterns, even in just what you said, and they each raise really unique considerations. So maybe we can kick it off and start with an agent that's moving data around a regulated entity, and that might be data that is subject to a wall or raises material non-public information questions. How do you think about what the agent is doing and how the SEC might look at that type of a fact pattern?
So traditionally, it would be, what did an individual know? And that was something that walls could manage, that you could put in place policies and procedures. You could put people in separate rooms with locked doors so that you could prove that the person engaging in the trading didn't have material non-public information or something that would result in a violation of the federal securities laws. Increasingly, it's becoming a question of, what did the system know? How you set those barriers up within a system, particularly when it's a learning system and a system that is moving across an entity and possibly into subs or other areas and out into the internet. It's being done in a way that an AI model never sleeps. You don't necessarily know everything that it's looked at, particularly not in real time. It's more information than any human would ever be able to be processing or managing. So it's how you do that and segregate a system and set it up so that you can prove a negative, which is next to impossible when you're trying to avoid an investigation, because the investigation in and of itself has a implication in terms of resources, reputation, all of those types of things. So being able to show, I have systems in place that manage how this new technology is gaining information, accessing information, and where it is limited and where it is not, is going to be the area of focus.
That really speaks to me, because in a world of agentic AI, one of the things that we really think a lot about is what systems the AI has access to, whether system information can be limited based on role or matter. So there are many different embedded concerns here. And I know there are folks thinking deeply about this within organizations and compliance teams and legal teams. So let's take a different kind of factual scenario. Now we have agents that are out there in the world. They can do so many different things. They might be able to provide information. They may be able to make recommendations. They may be able to actually execute payments or trades. Where do you think the the regulatory interest comes in from the SEC in that context? And what are some of the core policy concerns animating that?
There's a tripartite mission at the SEC. The one that is most implicated here, though, is investor protection. And particularly when you have retail investors who are the ones who are most likely in a lot of ways to access AI and ask it for a recommendation of a security or for investment advice. The SEC treats the agent as they would an individual engaged in this behavior. The first place you'll see it is with regard to that registration regulation and all of those overlays on there. The next thing will be really that misstatement, disclosure, market manipulation, because the agent may know what somebody else's trading is. You may have insider trading, got that fraud piece that lays on top of those regulated entity registration pieces. Obviously, all of this is facts and circumstances based. As the SEC starts to apply this, we're going to get a good idea of how they're looking at the various facts and circumstances based on disclaimers, based on the way that systems are set up and how information flows or doesn't flow. And those policies and procedures that are put in place, those additional things can be very important to the analysis of whether AI is going to get caught up in SEC regulation.
I think that mirrors something that we see on a bunch of different regulatory fronts. There are often terms and conditions or contracts that are trying to make clear what is this AI actually attempting to accomplish and what role do we see it serving. And looking ahead to how those contracts are going to be interpreted, how those relationships are going to be interpreted in an increasingly complex, what we might call AI value chain, is going to be really interesting. We're still at early days, but to your point, what did a company say that the AI was intended to do, and what did various actors that were collaborating on a project say about how their collaboration was going to work? All of that is going to be important in articulating not only the role of the AI, but the role of the respective players. It's such an interesting moment. I think we always feel this way in the AI space. We're still early, but also seeing just incredible activity and innovation happening. So not so dissimilar to the blockchain era.
Completely understand. What they say it's not going to do may be even more important than what they say it is going to do, or what they say the collaboration is intended for. I think you have to be coming at it from all different sides, and you have to be careful, because if there's a market dislocation or if there's harm to retail investors, there's going to be that blame shifting that we've seen in a number of areas. We've seen it in the crypto space. We've seen it in traditional finance, not just DeFi and AI areas. I think people have to be drafting with the idea in mind of what could happen, and figuring out what can happen. I mean, that's the hardest piece of drafting any contract going forward.
I think this is giving GCs and legal teams a lot to think about, because we're talking about so many different core areas, not only compliance, but also contracting, where you see GCs or your clients looking in their own processes. And that might be regulated entities or otherwise, to make sure that they're shored up on these fronts. What's on the hit list there?
The first thing you have to do is do an inventory and map. You have to map how information flows. You have to map how decision making is occurring. And you have to go up and down and left and right. That's kind of the first piece that we often take on as GCs, because it's no longer, are we going to use AI? It's, how are we going to use AI? Once that's done, it's creating a system where you have clear ownership and accountability within that system, and the right policies and procedures, so that if you do get an investigation or if something goes awry, you can, one, put an end to it very quickly, right? And know that it's happening through monitoring and the proper escalation procedures in place. So all of those are the things that I see GCs really wrestling with. The boring piece, which is actually very important if you get a call from the SEC, is that documentation and auditability piece of it. That's the final piece. Once things are in place, you have an ownership structure, an accountability structure, figuring out how you're going to document all of that as it's evolving, because things don't just stay in one place anymore. This is an iterative process that the GCs are having to go through at each one of those stages.
Melissa, we get a lot of questions too on the policy landscape. And of course, that can change with administrations. But tell us a little bit about what that looks like from your perspective for companies that are trying to really productively engage with agencies, SEC or otherwise, on these emerging technology issues. What do you think is most effective there? And particularly in these novel areas, is there a path towards conversation and education that is worth considering?
That's a really important point, and I appreciate appreciate you asking about it because I think people are afraid of the agencies, understandably, but they should not be in the way of innovation. And some of the best conversations that I had when I was a regulator had to do with people educating me. That was a huge part of the process that I would go through in any investigation. When people come to understand how things are working, there can be that collaboration, but there needs to be the education. And don't know as much about how systems are evolving and working and the benefits and all of those things, that there has to be true collaboration. I do think that the administration at the SEC is open to those dialogues. I do think that this is a time when you can get traction. I'm not sure that there's going to be a full regulation put into place. I think they're going to continue to rely on the existing rules. So understanding the existing rules so that then you can go in and talk to the staff about how they can apply in a healthy way to not prevent innovation, to allow for the benefits to come from this is probably the most important thing that can be going on right now so that we don't end up with something that prevents innovation or causes problems, which really can happen in a regulated system.
I also think there might be, and I'd be curious for your views on this, an interesting role for standards and protocols. Sometimes what we see around AI and agentic AI is there are a lot of different innovations happening, but if there can be alignment around certain handoffs between regulated and non-regulated entities, that opens up room to say there's some general consensus for how this should work and possibly even better consumer understanding and education around that as well. So I'd be interested for your thoughts too on whether we're likely to see more standard setting, more protocols in the market, particularly in regulated spaces.
I think that there can be. The challenge is this is ever evolving and always evolving. So I think they can't be some of the standards or what we've seen in the past. They are more concepts that can change and evolve. They're principles. Let's think of it as a principle-based system as opposed to a rules-based system. I do think that that can occur. And the starting point is the securities laws and the underlying policy goals, allowing innovation, allowing capital formation, allowing well-regulated markets with investor protection, and allowing for it to be on that principle basis, something that can move more quickly, perhaps, than what we've seen in the past.
I don't doubt that there are going to be some interesting proposals coming up in the next year or two. I mean, agentic commerce is certainly a buzzword on everyone's lips, and we're going to start to see many complicated and interesting agentic applications coming out globally. I mean, I think there's so much global interest in this too that we may see regulators in other countries take this up. And it's an area that I'm really excited to be watching with you. And I feel very lucky to be in conversation with you about these topics all the time. So thank you for bringing what would be a normal Teams or Zoom chat to a broader audience today. It's really been a pleasure, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. Keep calling me. These are great conversations.
Will do. That's today's drop. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more of the AI Drop, hit subscribe and join us each week for fresh insights on what's shaping the future of AI. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute legal advice or establish an attorney-client relationship. It may be considered attorney advertising, so prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The views expressed here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of their firms, organizations, or clients. For more information, please visit freshfields.com.